أهلا وسهلا فيكم مرة أخرى أيها الأخوة والأخوات في مؤتمر أكوا للممارسات الفضلى. بحب أرحب فيكم في السيشن اللي عنوانها Innovative Approaches for Addressing Water and Wastewater Utility Challenges in the Region. This session is focused on water utility innovative approaches that are related to governance, reform, and transformation of utilities, that are also focused on operational innovations when it comes to water utilities, partnerships with the private sector, and also on technical innovations related to addressing technical challenges of non-revenue water and asset management. On this session, we have a panel of distinguished speakers representing different Arab countries, international organizations, and regional organizations. And also we have a guest from Turkey. I thought this session will be interactive. We're going to have short introductory statements from our distinguished panel, and then we go for a question and answer session where we can basically learn from each other and learn from outside or other experiences. For the speakers, for each speaker we have about 5 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes of introductory statements. I'd like to start with Mr. Geir Beckham. He's the Executive Director of IWA, which is an international network of professional utility members and individuals of more than 10,000 members. And it works in 130 countries. Mr. Beckham, he has more than 25 years of experience in environmental management, international development programs, water resources, and he worked in different countries. Also, he's been exposed to and he managed different programs related to innovation and research that basically to improve policy reform at national levels or at regional levels. In terms of history, for the past few years, since 2012, he's been managing the International Water Association. Before that, he was working for the World Water Council as Director General from 2008 to 2010. He has a PhD and a master's degree from the Netherlands, University of Amsterdam in environmental sciences, PhD, and physical geography and environmental sciences master's degree. Mr. Geir, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Supposedly first in the morning, but now we're a little bit later and we are landed already in the afternoon. What I would like to do is to touch upon 2 or 3 subjects to set the scene a little bit of what we are trying to be discussing in this high-level panel. First of all, within the region we see, of course, a long-standing and ever-increasing challenge at the resource side. There's major challenges, and those resource challenges, without appropriate management, we know, is not going to help us in the future to come to some sort of a sustainability. So we see that on the first side, there's a dramatic need to become much more efficient. So it's actually the R from reducing. We need to reduce dramatically, not only on the urban side, but also in the agricultural side, the water consumption, becoming much more efficient. And this is not only a technical question. I will come back to that when talking about innovation in a moment. Secondly, we need to use the second R, the reuse. There's a dramatic need, if we want to cover the demand in the future, while diminishing the demand, but still the demand that is left there, we need to reuse and recycle at much larger scales than we have ever imagined up to now. And this is a major transition that we are standing for the whole region. Imagine 20 years from now, reuse and recycling has to be a core part of the supply, on the supply side of the resource. And all of that, I come to the third R, which is reform. If we want to become more efficient, and if we want to be establishing much more of reuse, then we have to be really open to significant reforms in the sector. Reform is not something that happens and then you sit back, we have reformed and we're done. So now we can go home. Reform is a continuous process of challenging yourself, your colleagues, your institutions, your approaches of, is this still fit for purpose? Not only now, but also looking ahead in the future. And so reform is painful. It's ouch, because you have to leave behind some of the practices that you're so accustomed to with your colleagues than in the past. Reform is also needed because circumstances change. Of course, in the region, we know that circumstances are changing dramatically. And one of the major challenges for quite a few countries at the utility level is that the finances are running out. You can only do so much and so long of stretching what we have seen as a deteriorating situation, context in which the utilities are operating in terms of governance and management in countries. And of course, when you look, for example, in Egypt, with increasingly running dry the resources, the reserves that were available, and you're coming up to a point that if nobody continues to pay their bills, it's very simple, then you cannot run a utility. It's a very simple dimension, but it is some of the very basic practices that we are seeing emerging. The challenge of that is, of course, you end up in a vicious cycle down, because, of course, if there's no income, you cannot maintain. If you don't maintain, the services decline. You move away from 24/7. And, of course, then people are less and less willing to pay their bills. So once you're in that spiral, it's very hard to turn around. Of course, then, yeah, we need to have a bit of a remedy. Now, a key part of this is reform, but also innovation. And throughout the week, we'll be talking quite a bit about innovation. We will see technical aspects, we will see managerial aspects, but we also have to realize that innovation itself, at the core, is a political process. It is really changing the mindsets of people, again, that what is out there could be part of their future. And that means sometimes leaving behind very well established technologies. We know they work, but they might not be the right ones, particularly if we start to take into account the whole energy question associated with providing water and water services. Last but not least, that's a big agenda. Reuse, recycle, reduce, reform, innovate. Yep, and we need a lot of capacity. And so this is a very dramatic transition that we are standing for, and this won't happen with, I would say, a major mobilization, but at the same time also creating new opportunities for jobs, for businesses, that really builds the capacity in the region. And I will be happy in the coming days to further exchange ideas with you, and we will be definitely be in touch over the coming days. Thank you.
Thank you, Geir, for these introductory statements about the reform and the reform agenda, and the challenges that are facing different water utilities, and how to go about these challenges, and how utilities would feel as they address some of these challenges. I'll move on to Engineer Mamdouh Raslan. Engineer Mamdouh is a civil engineer with 36 years of experience in Egypt, in the water sector in particular. He worked for USAID on different programs in Egypt, capacity building programs, and reform programs in the water sector. Over the past couple of years, I think he's been the chairman of the holding company in Egypt. And Engineer Mamdouh is going to share with us the reform experience in Egypt. How did they go about it? What they've achieved so far, and where they would like to go. Engineer Mamdouh.
أتكلم بالعربي ولا إنجليزي؟ English? Okay, first of all, I would like to, I think my colleague from IWA did a very good introduction to what I'm going to say about the reform in Egypt. I mean, the reform in Egypt was, started on 2004 when we have a situation in Egypt that most of our facilities are deteriorating. Operation and maintenance are not done properly. And we have, at that time, we have a lot of donors who were working in Egypt, providing grants to in the water and wastewater sector. And then all of a sudden, when they started to evaluate these facilities and they saw this deterioration, they made the decision that, to stop any assistance to Egypt in this field. At that time, the government, decided also to move. They felt that this sector is going to be suffering a lot, and something has to be happen. Decision was taken to do the reform in the water sector, and the reform mainly is concentrating in the way that the sector is being managed. Before the reform, it was more of governmental entities are running the systems, and they don't care. They collect the revenue or they don't collect. There is no impact, so they see it. So the decision was to form companies, and these companies is being run as a business. Although it's 100% owned by the government, but they are following bylaws that's being established by the board of directors of these companies and also by the General Assembly. The term for each company is like 3 years for the board and 3 years for the General Assembly, based on the evaluation of the performance. It can be renewed or it can be replaced. Literally, we are not following the government rules. We are following our bylaws, which mainly is directing us to facilitate our work. One of the most problems that we were facing under reform is that we inherited all the staffing from the existing situation at that time. All the staffing was moved to our companies. This was a big burden to our companies. And still, we are trying to minimize this burden, but we're still suffering from it a bit. The second one is the pricing. Water tariff in Egypt is almost one of the lowest tariff in the world. We're talking about 23, like 0.04 cent dollar per cubic meter. So people, they don't care. They don't rationalize the use of the water, and this makes also our problem even more difficult. With all these issues, also when we started the reform, the first thing that we started is to introduce new technologies. We started to introduce, for the first time, every company now, we have a master plan that is being developed and also is being updated periodically in every year. We started to develop also the GIS system. We used to have the network, and nobody knows where the valves and where the pipes and what is the size, what is the age. All this has been updated on a GIS system that's allowing. We have to use one of the old technicians that, because there is nothing on paper, we have to use the old technicians to tell us where the valves and to put it on the GIS system and maps. Also, with the reform now, instead of having different entities responsible for the sector, we only have 4 organizations. The holding company and the 25 companies are responsible for operation and maintenance all over Egypt. And then we have 2 organizations is responsible to do the investment. And then 1 organization, which is the regulator. First time that we have a regulator in the water sector that's monitoring the performance of these companies. For the first time, a couple of, maybe last year, we managed with the regulator to provide our first tariff study requesting increase in tariff, and it was accepted by the economic unit of the cabinet, and I think it will be introduced soon to the cabinet for approval. So this is the first time that we do some increase on the tariff, and people start to feel that okay, they have to pay. People, they don't pay usually. Collection rate was, before the revolution, actually collection rates start to go up very high. Within the last 3 years, actually this was affected for, because of the security conditions. But I think now we are now getting back again to improve the collection. And also with the tariff increase, this will help us in closing our deficit, because the government is only paying portion of this deficit, like 25% of the deficit, and then we are suffering of not paying electricity, of not paying some contractors, and sometimes also leads that some of the governmental entities are not paying water as well. So I think it's a very complicated in the financial that we are trying to resolve it. I think for the first time now the government is listening to us, and they are planning to take some actions on this to improve the situation. I tried to be very brief, and I am ready for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Mamdouh. These are excellent points for discussion later about the cost and the cost recovery in Egypt. Egypt, they produce about 25 million cubic meter of water at 4 cents. That's about, what, $1 million. If they sell at 10 cents, that's $2.5 million. If they sell at 20 cents, that's $5 million. So there is the gap between what does it cost to produce the water and how much they sell the water at is a big gap. And it seems that the holding company is addressing this through pushing the cost down. Let's reduce the cost first, and then we can work on the tariff, which is a debatable issue. Where do we start? Do we reduce the cost and raise the tariff? Or do we do both together? This is something that we can discuss after the panel. I'll move on quickly to, unfortunately, Rola Majdalani, who works for ESCWA in Beirut, is not with us today. Rola is the Director of Sustainable Development Policies Division at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia, ESCWA. And she couldn't come. And we have Carol Shoshani with us here. Carol is the Chief of Water Resources Section. She has a PhD with research focused on economic and international challenges facing the Arab region. Very interesting one. We'd like to hear from her about basically the water sector within the context of post-2015 development agenda and what is the preparatory process. Carol, the floor is yours.
Well, we've talked about the firm level, the national level, and now we move on to the regional and even global level and how the region and the global processes for a development agenda are intersecting. I'm sure all of you know already in the room about the Millennium Development Goals that were set at the beginning of this millennium to talk about the key objectives of the global community to address poverty and a lot of sector issues. One of the key issues there, as I'm sure you know, is the goal 7 of the MDGs that was to halve the proportion of people without access to